Hello, and welcome to Generative Now. This is the show where we talk to the builders who are creating the world's most exciting AI products and companies. I am Michael Mignano. I'm a partner at Lightspeed. We're a global venture capital firm. And today we've got a great guest for you, someone who's made quite the splash with a recent product launch. It's Dan Siroker, the CEO and co-founder of Rewind, an AI startup that's on a mission to give humans the superpower of perfect memory. They do this through a suite of products on macOS and iOS. They have an app that captures everything your computer sees or hears and then makes it really easy to quickly search for anything. And then most recently, they even announced a groundbreaking physical device called the Pendant that can capture live conversations out in the real world to sync with your Rewind account. Prior to that, Dan was the co-founder of Optimizely, and he's got a really incredible story and journey that I'm excited to dig into. So without further ado, let's hear from Dan Siroker, co-founder and CEO of Rewind. All right. Hey, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Glad we could finally make this happen. Been very much looking forward to it.
Likewise.
So take us all the way back to early Dan. I want to hear like the beginning, like childhood, all that.
Sure. I grew up in Palo Alto. I actually grew up there because both my parents were immigrants to the country, and they wanted to figure out where they should go, have their kids grow up. And at the time, Palo Alto had some of the best public schools in the country, and they decided to live there. They had no real connection to the place, but because of that one decision, I think that set me up to be very lucky in life. I grew up surrounded by technology, surrounded by really ambitious people. I went to some great schools, some great public schools in Palo Alto. And a few formative experiences I had early on. One was that my mom was a secretary at the computer science department at Stanford. And I remember when I was 13, her boss, a professor, was always very kind. And every time he wanted to get a home computer for himself, my mom would be the one that ordered it for him. But because he knew that, he would always say, "Oh, and get one for yourself too." And so every time he would get a new computer, she would get one and bring it home. So like my brother and I have a twin brother, he and I would grow up getting like these new computers every time they came out. And I remember when I was 13, CD-ROMs were new, and also sound cards were new. So I installed a Sound Blaster 16 and a CD-ROM drive in this computer that we had at home. And my mom's boss heard about it and actually asked me to like install it for him in his home computer. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is a professor of computer science and he can't even install his own CD-ROM drive and Sound Blaster 16. Maybe I have a shot at doing something in computers. And that propelled me then. I actually ended up going to Stanford, studying computer science, worked at Google as a product manager, left to go to the Obama campaign where I was the director of analytics. And then my first company was inspired by that job as the director of analytics. It was called Optimizely, and we grew that to 120 million in ARR and 450 employees and sold it. And it was actually during that experience of running Optimizely that I had the inspiration for what now is Rewind. And that inspiration was actually going deaf. I started to lose my hearing in my 20s due to a genetic condition. And when I tried a hearing aid, it was magical. To lose a sense and gain it back again felt like gaining a superpower. And ever since that moment, I've been on a hunt for ways that technology can augment human capabilities and give us superpowers. And that's what led me to Rewind. Rewind is a personalized AI powered by everything you see, and hear. It tries to do what a hearing aid does for hearing and glasses does for vision, but for memory instead.
That is an amazing summary of your life.
I skipped all the failures, by the way. So if you want to go back and say, hey, what were all the things that you did wrong on that journey? I gave you the happy path, but along the way, there's lots of missteps, and that's led me to ultimately, I think, a lot of learnings that led me to some of the success.
Yeah, I mean, you said so many interesting things, and I actually do want to dive into some of them. Maybe even all the way back to the free computers. I mean, that by the way, that is an amazing perk. What were some of these? Like, give us a sense of the timing. Was this like Pentium machines, Windows 3.1, or these iMacs? Like, what are you working with here?
Yeah, it was the original Macintosh was one of the first computers, and then we first got into PCs. I remember our first laptop was a 386. We used to play Dune on that. We'd have like a sleeper party. And
Dune or Doom?
Dune,
okay.
And then eventually Doom. But Doom came. Yeah. I think Dune came first. I actually remember playing Doom for the first time, actually on my mom's same boss, Hector Garcia Molina. He actually had it on his computer at his office at Stanford. I remember playing Doom for the first time and being like blown away at like 3D, first person shooter. And and just being around that was amazing. In his lab, actually, he was the advisor to Larry from Google, Larry and Sergey. And I remember seeing them around, early on, and Sergey would go around everyone in roller skates, and so just being around that was like such an amazing foundational part of my youth.
I remember back then, because I think we're probably around the same age. I remember a lot of people were buying PCs from companies like Dell and Gateway, but then some people were also building their own PCs. Did you ever get into that?
The very, very first startup experience I had was I was probably a sophomore in high school, and one of my classmates' older brothers, who was a student at Berkeley, started a company to sell Linux machines. We were technically co-founders, although he kind of cheated us out of any kind of stock or equity. We were very naive. We signed some papers saying we were co-founders, but never got anything from it. And we spent a summer building Linux machines. And he had this deal where the East Bay, he could get like reseller parts really cheap. And that's why he was able to sell. We would sell, I think back then, it was like a $300 Linux machine that nobody else offered, very beautiful, well-designed, that we would assemble. We were like his little assembly line. And I remember it so vividly because putting in the RAM chips were so painful. I would end up every day with these like calluses, calluses, like pushing the chips into the motherboards. So I probably built, in that era, but in high school, I probably built 100 machines on my own.
That's so cool. If you don't mind, and if this is something you don't want to cover, that's fine too. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the experience of going deaf. And I say this as somebody that has also struggled with some hearing issues. So I was a drummer for many years, and as a child, and I didn't wear earplugs as often as I should have. And so I have tinnitus. My ears are always ringing. But deafness is something that I always worried about. And so I imagine that was a pretty traumatic experience for you. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that it is incredibly common. Deafness is one of the most common things people have but don't talk about because there's kind of a stigma, age-associated stigma with it. Actually very early on, when I was thinking about different startup ideas that were inspired by my hearing aid, like across the globe, it's like half of the world is like not that great at hearing, or like is not perfect hearing. And then like a good quarter is like, debilitating hearing, but a much, much smaller percentage of those people have or can afford a hearing aid. So just to be clear, it's very common. I very often, I'll mention that I have hearing loss, and somebody's like, yeah, I also have a hearing loss. Like, what do you use? What hearing aid? So just to be clear, that's why I also talk about it, because I want to normalize it. It's not a big deal. Like people wear glasses, and there's no stigma associated with that. Like, or at least no longer. Maybe once there was. But like today, it's amazing. And so I'll share my experience. First of all, I was I'm generally very optimistic. And so I was so in denial that I actually had a hearing problem. In fact, it may sound gross, but for a while I just thought I had like really bad earwax or something. And I remember like in our office in San Francisco early on, 2013, just being like, why can't I hear? Like I was thinking it was earwax. I even went in to try to get clean, and they said that's not it. And then I went to like a specialist, and they looked at the sort of bones in my ear, and it was otosclerosis, which is a genetic condition that sort of affects you selectively. It's sort of the bones calcify in your ear before they should. So my right ear is really bad. My left ear is like not as bad. So I got that diagnosis. I was kind of in that. I was like, that can't be. I sort of did research. And then—
How old were you?
30. I was 30. I just turned 30.
Okay.
I honestly did not believe any of it until one very distinct moment, which is when I tried a hearing aid. And it truly was magical. In that moment, I both got the power to hear again, which was really cool. But the bigger realization was how bad it had gotten. Like I couldn't tell how bad my hearing was until it got back. And that was kind of a secret that now inspires what we're working on today, which is I believe as humans, we are so limited by our biology that we don't even know the limits of our biology. We're like horses with blinders on. We keep going through our lives, experiencing our senses, experiencing our memories, experiencing our lives, but not realizing how much better those lives could be with technology. And it was only when I tried it, and like, it was amazing. I would try the hearing aid and like, I'd rub my shoulder and be like, wait, this makes a sound. And that's the moment of delight and like having a bigger, fuller life that I want to bring to so many more parts of the human condition. That's why we're doing Rewind.
That's so amazing. Well, I want to dig into that and sort of how that was the inspiration for Rewind and get into Rewind. But of course, Optimizely is also a really big part of your story, and obviously like a really impressive company and journey. So give us a little sense for that journey and that story of starting Optimizely and maybe moving on from Optimizely at some point.
So I joined the campaign, the Obama campaign.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
I worked there. I actually showed up really just as a volunteer because I saw Barack Obama speak at Google in November 2007. He talked about how he wanted to take what we're doing at Google with evidence and science and feedback and data and bring that to the government. And that was inspiring and exciting. And I remember the very last thing he said when he came to Google. You can watch this on YouTube. He says, "I want you to be involved." And at the time, he's third in the polls behind Hillary Clinton and John Edwards. That euphemism, "I want you to be involved," is really, give me donations. I need help. But I took him literally. I flew to Chicago 2 weeks later, joined his campaign as a volunteer, and very quickly
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. And for a while, people called me Google Dan, and because I had to come from Google, and I tried to figure out how I could have an impact, and I hadn't really been in that kind of a world before. I had been in technology in the Bay Area, and my view, even I had such a narrow view of what it meant to be smart. Now I was immersed and surrounded by these smart people, but in an entirely different domain of smartness. These weren't like technologists. These were like political people, and political not in a negative sense, but like people who understood organization, how to build a movement, how to communicate, how to tell stories. Amazing, compelling, and such a diehard group of people. Because the people at the campaign, you got to remember, December 2007, nobody thought Barack Obama would win the nomination, let alone the presidency. So these all, including myself, were like pretty optimistically delusional people. Like they were there because they truly believed in the candidate.
It sounds like a startup. And actually, you did characterize it as a startup, right? These are believers. These are missionaries.
True believers, missionaries, true believers, brilliant people who've now gone off to do amazing things. It was, and I look back at that moment in my life and thinking how lucky I am to have been in that group of people. In fact, just in November, we're going to have a 15-year anniversary of that group. It was it still tastes, it still has this amazing connection for everyone. And we would work our ass off, and we worked, I can't even imagine how we did it. We did like 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day of the week, like no breaks. We never left the office. It was all downtown Chicago. My apartment was just a short walk there. I don't think I saw any sights the entire time I was there. I gained 50 pounds, 50, over the length of the campaign because we're just eating,
from working all the time and just
sedentary eating. And we just most of the food we ate would be like donations, kind of like people would bring like deep dish pizza from Chicago or whatever, and then we'd drink beers, and it was just like horribly unhealthy and very unsustainable.
Again, sounds like a startup.
Well, the difference between this and a startup is we knew that it would be over on November 4th. Startups, you have this belief that maybe it'll keep going forever. So you have some gas in the tank, but boy, we just put it all on the floor, all on the field until November 4th. And so we were all just in horrible state. I told myself after the campaign, I will never do anything analytics related again. So that's the first thing I said. So I got out of the campaign, moved my overweight, 50 pounds overweight body to San Francisco, where I'd always had the aspiration to start a company. I'd seen these startups early on, and I teamed up with Pete Kumin and a fellow product manager from Google, and we started thinking about startup ideas. And one of the worst ways to do that is to sort of take a whiteboard and write down what are cool startup ideas.
Never works.
I'm even embarrassed. I think we had like 2 whole full sides of different startup ideas on a whiteboard. If I looked at them, they're probably all bad. Anyway, one of those bad ideas was an online math game for kids called Carrot Sticks. And we built it. We spent 9 months on it. And the biggest challenge we had was that we weren't parents, teachers, or kids. So we weren't any of the core constituents for which we were building. And it's funny. We spent 9 months learning really one lesson. And that one lesson was, it's really hard to build for somebody else. Because we weren't any of these core constituents, we had no clue how to get distribution. We had no way, and we built a product some users loved, but like we couldn't get anyone else. It was like pulling teeth to get distribution. So the second startup was called Spreadly. And that the problem we're solving was the problem we had at Carrot Sticks, getting distribution. We built a product that would allow companies to incentivize their customers to tell others about their product. And so either giving them a discount or a donation to charity or something. But we applied to Y Combinator with that, which was very lucky, and we got in. And about a month after, or maybe it was more than a month after doing that, we got to this point where we realized, oh my gosh, the math just doesn't work out. Nobody, the social capital to spam your friends is always going to be greater than any kind of incentive or discount we could offer. So it's just the bottle's not going to work. But we learned, and the first lesson we learned was distribution. The second lesson we learned, and how hard it is. The second lesson we learned with Spreadly was how easy it is to build a product for yourself. We knew the product we needed, and that's when we finally got to this idea for Optimizely. It was about 2 weeks into Y Combinator. Over the weekend, I built a prototype of the early version of Optimizely, which is basically the product I wish we had in the Obama campaign to make it easy for anyone to do A/B testing. Showed it to Paul Graham. He said instantly, forget that other idea. Do this. This is A/B testing for marketers. And then we grew that, and it took off from there.
Waste. Did you use any of the tactics that got turned into a product at Optimizely on the Obama campaign? Were you doing A/B testing for the Obama campaign?
Yeah. I was doing A/B testing all the time. Yeah, you can go back. Wow. I've given talks on sort of like, how we use data to win the presidential election, including A/B tests of the very first page you see when you come to BarackObama.com. Back then, most campaigns, the way they would make the decision of what shows up there would be like the grizzled, white-haired, usually white man in some room saying, "No, it should be this or it should be that. I'm a political operative. I know what the website should say." Even though I've only been doing like print ads for 30 years. And what was exciting about the campaign when I joined was because we were the underdogs. We were third in the polls in the primary, in the Democratic primary. The campaign manager, David Plouffe, had what he described as a risk-reward mentality. And he describes this actually in a book that he wrote afterwards about the campaign, which is basically the idea that if they just did everything every other campaign did, they would end up just like everyone expected, third, and they wouldn't have won the nomination. So he had a tolerance for risk, which is funny to think that A/B testing was considered a risk, but it was willing to basically say, I'm not going to force my decision on what should the email say, what should the website say. I'm going to let experiments actually help inform that. And a great example is the very first page you get to in BarackObama.com used to be this like very presidential looking out on a sea of people. And the very first test I ran was trying to compare that to an idea that somebody else had, Sam Graham-Felsen, who's also gone off to do great things. And he built this amazing hype video, like a 3-minute video of like with the leaving the 2004 DNC speech. Anyway, he built this. And he said, "Hey, Dan, I want to put this on the website." And I thought, let's do an A/B test. We actually went in thinking this is such a great. We were diehard believers in the candidate, so we thought this is going to work out so well. And so not only was that an amazing experience because we were dead wrong. Every video performed much worse than every image, but the image that performed best was the one that people would least expect. It was a black and white photo of Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Sasha and Malia in his lap. Very informal, very humanizing. Of course, in hindsight, you say, "Oh, that was such a great picture," because like it makes him look like a regular guy and makes him look, like he loves his family. But like in the moment, that definitely would not have been the variation we chose. And we did a study after the campaign to figure out just that one experiment, the impact. It was at least tens of millions of dollars in additional donations that came to the campaign from the actual email addresses that we got from that page. A huge potential impact on things like volunteers and others. So like that top of the funnel experiments or questioning our assumptions and having a risk reward mentality proved to me that A/B testing is actually a really good idea.
I've heard that's a common story at YC. I didn't do YC, but I've heard that, you apply with a certain idea and, 3 weeks in, you're building something completely different. Was that your experience as well with your, the different people in your cohort?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And many of the people in my cohort have gone off to build multi-billion-dollar companies, some of which the companies I think that they created there, and others that created subsequent. So it's again, it reminds me very much of the Obama campaign, where I was like, I feel I was so lucky to be at this very early stage in so many amazing, brilliant people's careers. Similarly at YC, the batch of people we were all pretty young and naive, but many of those people have gone off to do amazing things. And I think in large part due to YC. I mean, YC is the best way to take a raw, unfinished product and turn it into like an execution-oriented entrepreneur that maximizes their chance of success. And I certainly owe all of my success as an entrepreneur to those foundational few weeks in YC. And certainly Optimizely wouldn't exist without it. But I don't think I'd even be able to do what I'm today without what I learned in YC.
Tell us about the Optimizely journey and maybe how some of those lessons applied to the success of Optimizely.
Yeah. What was very amazing early on was because I understood the problem so well, we got distribution almost instantly. Many technologists and entrepreneurs make the mistake of thinking that their job is to think and obsess about the solution. I would argue that you as an entrepreneur, you should spend 80% of your brain obsessing about the problem, 20% of your brain obsessing about the solution, not vice versa. Google does the opposite. Google has this ivory tower academic mindset of like, and you see a whole failed litany of products like Google Wave and Google Buzz and Google Glass. They're all that's just like these ideas that wouldn't it be cool if ... ideas. There's some cool technology and like, let's go figure out a problem that we might be able to solve with it. With Optimizely, boy, it was so much easier to start with a problem. It was a problem I felt. We saw the value of A/B testing, but like I said earlier, we had the deadline of the election. Like we knew November 4th was going to happen. So the amount of experimentation we could do, the amount of creative ideas we could test, were limited by the number of hours in the day and the capabilities of the team. At the time I was, I studied computer science, so I could instrument and build a lot of these experiments in JavaScript. Most marketers can't. And so that was the real insight, is like, how do we create a tool that gives marketers the same power that a web developer has to do, interesting, compelling, different experiences on the web, and make it super easy. And so the main lesson from that was, by knowing the problem so well, there were so many things we didn't have to build. So anyway, that gave us this amazing advantage of figuring out what not to do. And the story of what actually, the power of what I saw firsthand, helping elect a president is something people want to hear about. It's sort of that controversy and that kind of like compellingness gave us a lot of opportunities to speak at conferences. And I think that propelled a lot of the early growth as well. So that was the early days. Happy to zoom in. Yeah, I guess the TLDR of the rest of the 10 years was after about 3 years, we actually we achieved what we'd set out to achieve, building the product I wish we had in the campaign. And I think the biggest mistake I made then was that was what I was passionate about, and I kind of fell out of love with the business. We had achieved what we'd set out, and I didn't set for myself kind of what's the next big thing we want to do? What's the next thing that I am excited to wake up every morning and persevere through to do? And I think that was kind of the beginning of the end of sort of what could have been a big multi-billion-dollar public company. We ultimately sold it, and very proud of that outcome. It still exists today. The acquiring company of Optimizely loved the brand so much that they just rebranded their whole company, Optimizely.
Oh, wow. So they absorbed the brand for themselves. Wow, that's interesting.
Just a few weeks ago, I was actually at Opticon, which is the Optimizely customer conference, which we've been doing for 10 years. It's my first time back now after a couple of years, and the CEO of Optimizely now was very gracious to have me on the keynote stage. And it was just so amazing to have this sort of like it felt almost like a teenager. Like I had birthed this child of Optimizely. I'd sold it off. They went off to boarding school or something, and now it's a great thriving company. And one day, who knows, might be a public company.
That's awesome. This theme that you mentioned, it's come up a few times on this show, actually. This theme of really having empathy for the problem. And it maps to even what you said about Google. If you're a big incumbent, you can sort of look for opportunities and try to like make up solutions. But really the advantage that a startup has, and I think this is very, very important, given now there are so many AI startups going up against incumbents, you really can't win unless you truly have empathy for the problem, right? And that is the advantage that a small team has. And it sounds like that was the case for Optimizely for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Customer empathy is the absolute most important thing, because if without it, you end up fooling yourself. You end up making the mistake of thinking that the sophistication of your solution is what matters, when in reality, users and customers, they just want a solution to a problem. They don't give a damn if it's a human being on the other end typing it all out manually, or how fancy and how well how good your code quality is. They just want a solution to a problem. And when you understand the problem, what the biggest, for people who are skeptical of this idea, and I hope there are not that many, but if you are, for the biggest benefit you get is figuring out what not to do. That's the thing. If you don't understand the problem, you end up creating work for yourself that you could just skip because it doesn't matter. People won't use it. And if it's a feature nobody will use, then there's any amount of effort building it is wasted.
I want to talk a little bit more about you leaving Optimizely. Do you think that was the result of you having so much exposure to analytics between your role at Google, the Obama campaign, and then all the time at Optimizely?
I think I definitely told myself I never wanted to do analytics again after the campaign, mostly because I conflated the painful experience in my body with the activity at the time. There was nothing inherent about analytics that I didn't like. In fact, I think it's an area that I'm very excited about. And I think data-driven decision-making is still a huge opportunity. So it wasn't the category. It was more the specifics of the mission and purpose. And I'm generally very, like I said, optimistic. I could get excited about a lot of things, and I just didn't. I actually probably made the mistake of thinking that my job. I got this advice probably from somebody. I thought my job as a CEO of a 40-person company in 2013 was to hire people better than me and then get out of the way. And what I did was actually hire really great product and engineering leaders. I wasn't that great at hiring sales, marketing, and customer success leaders because I just wasn't that good at that stuff. And so I ended up spending all my time on sales, marketing, and customer success because I'd sort of hired the parts of the business I could do, I knew, and I sort of didn't get a chance to be connected to the product. I didn't get a chance to be connected to users and customers as much. And so most of my day ended up being areas of the business I didn't love. And a lot of just as the company gets bigger, you deal with people issues all the time. And when we're 400 people, all of the issues were just people issues. And so that also was very draining. And I think had I been more like Lou Cerny, who actually was somebody I met with, and Lou Cerny was then the CEO and co-founder of New Relic. And Lou was famously this CEO who codes. But I thought that wasn't my job. I thought I would be selfish. And in hindsight, that was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. Was I was kind of penny wise, pound foolish. I sort of did the things I thought the company wanted, and then I hated my job. And then ultimately, by hating my job, I wasn't as good as my job. And then that sort of, that meant that we didn't reach our full potential.
So you leave Optimizely, and at some point, you start Rewind. Talk to us about that journey between leaving, this one amazing company that you built into now starting what you're working on today.
Most people will tell you that if you're going to do 2 startups, you should take a break in the middle. Actually, a lot of people tell you they force you to do that. I kind of did the opposite. I actually founded the company that now is Rewind before I finished selling Optimizely.
Oh, wow.
So it was something that as I said, I had been called to do this from this experience of trying a hearing aid. But the time between that moment and actually starting the company, that was about 7 years. So it was quite a bit of time before and honestly, that also played a role in my day-to-day satisfaction at Optimizely. I had this grass is greener feeling about, boy, wouldn't it be amazing to use technology to augment human capabilities? Or do I make websites slightly better at converting? It's like when you have that choice in your mind, it's definitely hard to stay in love with what you're doing. I don't have any of the sort of feelings of being trapped. That's the other challenge I had at Optimizely. I kind of felt trapped. I wanted to do this other thing, but the founder of the company, I can't just leave it and go do something else. So I felt very trapped, and that also created a lot of resentment. So and ever since I started Rewind, I think my worst day at Rewind is still probably way better than any day my last 5 years at Optimizely.
It definitely, from afar and seeing sort of just the pace of shipping and new products that are coming out, it definitely seems like the team is in a zone now where you all must be having a blast right now. I just see all these announcements and these new things getting shipped. I mean, I recognize it from when I built my company. It looks like you're having a blast. We are
absolutely having a blast. We're hiring too. If you want to have a blast and join a 20-person company. And we did so many better things in terms of setting up the team to have a blast. We hire only really experienced people. We give them a lot of ownership and autonomy. So like today with a team of 20, we're doing far more than I think we did when I was at Optimizely with a team of 400. So I'm a big believer in a small, nimble team is able to do much better, ship much faster than a large, bloated team of people. And so that's another big advantage, is that it also that minimizes the overhead as a manager, as a leader. Like I don't have to deal with all of the people problems that come with hundreds of people. I can focus on the things that matter. I can focus on problems, on customers, on product, and not on sort of man-made artificial politics and people jockeying for titles and positions and all that stuff.
So let's talk about the product. I know what it is, and I'm sure some of the listeners do as well. But why don't you give an overview of what Rewind does, and specifically about the product itself?
Rewind is a personalized AI powered by everything you've seen, said, or heard. We started with a Mac app and actually launched it less than a year ago. It's kind of crazy to think that's gone so fast. We launched it on the Mac. It runs in the background, captures what you see. It does optical character recognition on what you see and turns that into text, stores it all locally. So we don't have access to it. Your employer doesn't have access to it. It's very private. And does the same thing with audio. So meetings, you can transcribe everything you say, everything you hear, stores it all locally. Then with all of that data, you can do simple things like rewind time. That's why it's called Rewind. You can just rewind back to, what was that thing I just saw or I read? And you can copy and paste anything from your past. You can search through anything you've seen or heard. And you can also ask Rewind. We have this integration with a large language model where you can actually ask any question. A good example of that is you can ask Rewind to write you an email. There's a demo on our site I show where it actually asks it to, write me an email to Sam Altman asking to catch up. And it uses all of the context of my past. It starts with, hey, I remember fondly being introduced in 2010 by Paul Graham. It's great to have you as an investor in the company. I want to give you an update on some of our latest progress. All of those things are all possible with the context of everything I've seen, said, or heard. So that's what we did on Mac. We've launched on iPhone not too long ago, and we're working on Windows today. And also more recently, we launched the Pendant. We launched it into pre-order. It's not available yet, which is a wearable, an AI wearable that captures not just what you experience on your digital devices, but out in the real world as well. In a very privacy-first way, we capture what you say and you hear, store that again all locally, and respect the privacy of other people you meet. We don't record anyone without their consent. And that builds a much better context to really give you this superpower of both perfect memory and a much more productive, much more efficient way to live your life.
There's so much to unpack here. You mentioned that the application stores everything locally. But also now you're cross-platform, right? You're on my desktop, you're on my iPhone. How are these things communicating with one another and making sure the context travels cross-device while storing everything locally and securely?
Yeah, so today it actually does not travel across devices, which is one of the top requested features we get. We're actively at work on end-to-end encryption across devices, so it is able to give you the full context of everything you've seen, said, or heard in any device. That's a really hard problem to get done well, so it's going to be a while before we have that available, but that's something that we're definitely very keen on making possible, because that's really the promise of our product is how comprehensive. On the Mac right now, it's not like an integration with any one, with these three silos. It's not integrating with these different tools. It's literally everything you see, any app, any experience. And when you extend that metaphor to your iPhone, that massively improves the comprehensiveness. And then you extend that metaphor to the real world, and you finally get so much context that you ultimately could build a digital clone of you to do the things you do every day and save you time. There's so many things a bot can do for you in your day-to-day life that will save you time. And we think we can do that in a way that respects your privacy. That's a huge win.
It feels like a no-brainer. When I first heard about Rewind, I was like, oh, wow, amazing. If I could have perfect memory and I could remember everything, that would be incredible. But it also feels like there's a little bit of a difference between sort of capturing and storing, and then me as a user kind of tapping into that memory. And it seems like you're coming at it from multiple angles. How do you think about creating that shift in behavior for a user where they have to almost remember that they can remember now to get value out of the product?
That's a question we've thought a lot about. And it's hard. Behavior change is hard, regardless of what the behavior is. People are ingrained in their habits. There's a hook model, which is this idea that you need a sort of an external stimulus to get you to remember to use the product, and then sort of variable reward, and that sort of builds this feedback loop. One of our most successful features, which is meeting summarization, does this beautifully. Instead of having to remember to use Rewind, it just pops up after the meeting, asks you in one click, do you want to summarize and draft an email to all the participants in the meeting of the meeting? And that is like a really magical experience, because for me, I'm in back-to-back meetings. I don't have time to take notes. I'm mostly, trying to be more present. If after every meeting I could look like a genius and just send you here are the 10 bullet points that we talked about, here are the next steps and action items, that's a huge win for me. It's a huge win for everyone I meet with. So those are the kinds of features. We have several other things like that in store. I don't want to give any secrets away. Some of the things I'm really, really excited about that don't require you to remember to use Rewind. It just interjects itself into your existing workflow in a way that just feels delightful. And that's what we're really focused on is how do we take the power of everything we've captured, but now make it so easy and frictionless for you as a user to not have to remember to use Rewind.
Right. So it's really about the product sort of taking the initiative to sort of prove the value, rather than me saying, oh, Dan and I were having this conversation a year ago. What was it we said? Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's helpful, but it's much more rare. People, and it goes back to my point around people go around their life with blinders. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't realize what they forget. So many things we capture are so valuable to somebody, but they don't have the trigger to go back and ask, or think to ask, or even know what to ask to go back to that. And so that's where we feel like if we can avoid needing somebody to remember to do that, instead show up elegantly, because we know exactly the opportunities to do that. If we show up elegantly in their existing workflow, that's a much more compelling way to create value for them.
What are you finding to be the most common ways that people do actually engage with the product beyond it obviously capturing and storing and encrypting?
Yeah, there's two classes. There's the find something from your past, and I gave you some examples of that. And then there's the turning your past into action. Finding something from your past, very often it's this feeling. If you've ever had this feeling of this tip of the tongue feeling, like, what was that thing I saw? Where did I see that? Very often, most people will then go into their email, search for that thing. Yep. And they can't find it. And it's because it was an iMessage. It wasn't an email, or it was a Slack message, not an email. Or they'll be, searching Google trying to find it, but they can't find it because it was a tweet, not a website. So that sourcing problem is very common because we capture everything you see and you just search for the word or the thing that was related to the thing you're looking for. People are able to get that. That's kind of a class one of use case, which is find things from your past. Class two is turn your past into action. And that's where having the context of how you know somebody is really, really powerful. That's where you can sort of figure out, you can, right before every meeting, by the way, we have how do I know this person? You can click it and it sort of goes back and figures out all the references to that person. You can, you have it draft emails for you. Anything that ChatGPT can do, with the exception of the more recent multimodal stuff, that you can do that with Rewind and is powered with the context of the things you've seen, said, or heard.
You mentioned ChatGPT. You said you started this company, I think, a couple of years ago. Did you always think of this as an AI company? How are you using AI exactly? Talk a little bit about that.
So it was always an AI company, which is funny because I'll just draw an analogy to Optimizely. So in 2009, 2010, when we started Optimizely, we were in this sad category of companies that people didn't really think were sexy and nobody wanted to work on, called SaaS. Software as a service. Everyone wanted to be the next Facebook. It's kind of crazy to think about this. That everyone was into social, consumer. That was like, and we were this like weird, like, you want to do like SaaS, B2B? And then all of a sudden, it was the hottest category ever. 2 years later, like everything was SaaS, SaaSter. All these venture firms pretend like SaaS was the thing. It was so weird to like have been doing the thing for a while. And then the world around us conspiring to say that thing that you're doing is now a good idea. And the same thing happened with Rewind. We've been doing this since March 2020. We had no idea, even though Sam Altman was was actually our first real investor. We had no idea about what the power of GPT-4 could offer. But we started with a product, and actually was a different version of, or it was a different product. It was called Scribe. It was an online meeting bot. It would join meetings. It would transcribe the meeting. It would use AI to do speech transcription, taking what was said and turning that into text. And it was growing well, doing okay. We had this realization that, wow, Apple Silicon is really powerful. What if we did the magic of what Scribe does for meetings, but for your whole life and all locally? And that's what finally connected the dots. So it was a key enabling technology was Apple Silicon, M1, M2 chips. That's what enabled it to happen. And then while we're working on that, all of a sudden GPT-4 launches, and that becomes this amazing, like totally by accident. I had no prescience or no sort of vision that this would occur. We just happened to be collecting along the way the most valuable data set that you could use as context for GPT-4 to be able to actually make GPT-4 personalized to you.
That's fascinating. And, I think like other AI companies, it's been, the timing has been very, very beneficial for the listeners that maybe don't know about fundraising and raising venture capital. The traditional fundraising process is, you go either to a meeting or over Zoom and you pitch to venture capitalists. You had the benefit of so much excitement around AI that you were able just to post a video and say, hey, venture capitalists out there, if you want to invest in Rewind, send me a note, send me a video, and maybe we can do something together. Tell that story, because I thought that was pretty fascinating.
First of all, we didn't need to raise money. We actually had just raised from Andreessen Horowitz a seed round. We had, I think, well over 2 years of runway. So it wasn't the fact that we had like a budget of hiring that we needed to fill. It was actually two things. First, we felt like there would be an opportunity to tell our story and explain more about the company that would build a ton of trust with users. And we felt like a lot of people were concerned. They said, I love product Rewind, but what happens if you go out of business? Or what if Google comes by and buys you? So we really wanted to be clear that we are a big, strong, independent company, financially stable. We're not going anywhere. And then we had the thought, well, if we share that publicly, why not just put out the pitch deck that we would show investors and customers at the same time, sort of pitch our customers the same way we would pitch our users. I did like a 7-minute video of our pitch deck, which is basically the same pitch deck I gave to Andreessen Horowitz a few months ago, both updated numbers, and it took off. Millions of views on social media, over 1,000 offers to invest, a bunch of term sheets. I highly recommend asking investors to put in two numbers: the amount they want to invest and their value, and at what valuation. And with that, I had such an amazing data set on the actual market price of our company. A lot of people thought, oh, this is, you shouldn't, we were also very early on. We had $707,000 in annual recurring revenue. Most typical investors like to tell you shouldn't get across your skis on valuation and but I had market data. I could tell you, I have 1,000 data points on what people think we're worth today. So I'm not going to go crazy and choose, we had several people offer us over $1 billion valuation. We ended up settling on a $350 million valuation, which is still very high given our revenue. And I basically cherry picked the very best investors. I also had a little field, like anything else I should know. And one of the things I loved about this was this was like the opposite of how ego-driven venture capitalists like to interact with founders. What they would love is for you to drive to their office in Sand Hill Road, kiss their ring, wait half an hour in their lobby. This is the opposite. I turned that experience into them having to humble themselves, to submit into a little form, just like everyone else. And they have to put a little blurb about it. And the investor who I ended up taking as the lead wrote an amazing, letter or sort of paragraph of why they wanted to invest. They actually sent me I think 30 or 40 page PDF about why they were the best firm for us and what they believed about our category. And they truly wowed me in that process of clearly showing their commitment. And so they were one of the finalists I got to meet. And then I ultimately chose that investor as NEA. because we were so aligned on values. They're very long-term oriented investors. They invest, their fund life cycle is 15 years, not 10, which is typical. Oftentimes for companies like Cloudflare and others, they're actually buyers at the IPO. So because I want to be doing this company for the rest of my life, I view this as, something I want to do for decades. I want to, work with people who I'm going to work with for decades. And that's why this process was so amazing. I could cast a wide net, find like a good market price for the company, and pick the best investor who really aligned on values. Another analogy I like to draw is to online dating. Most venture capitalists most entrepreneurs, venture capitalists meet at the proverbial bar. Right. You go to a bar down the street, that if there's a person there that you happen to like, you hit it off. Maybe that's a way to date, maybe that's a way to get to know people, but there's so many other people than the people who are at the proverbial bar. And by casting a wide net, it's kind of like online dating. You go out there, you see who's a good fit. It's a numbers game on both sides. For some investors, we're a great fit. For others, we're not. Similarly for us, there's some investors great fit, some aren't. And so by casting a wide net, you get this sort of match made in heaven that you wouldn't get if you just went to the local bar down the street.
Yeah. Let's dive back into the product a bit. Talk to us how it actually works. Like, how is Rewind seeing and understanding everything on my screen, on my phone, and then we're going to get into the pendant, of course, as well. But maybe let's start with the iOS and macOS products.
It captures passively the things you see. And so basically the way you can think about it is it sort of takes a screenshot of your screen every 2 seconds. Then it compresses that. So it takes that data, which is actually quite large. Each of these screenshots of your full resolution monitor is quite large. It compresses it, and it compresses it exceptionally well. So we compressed it about 3,750 times smaller than the source data, which, and the way we can do that, by the way, is there's a ton of redundancy. Even I'm sure as you're watching in this meeting, you can see me gesticulating, but I don't know if I'm full screen on your screen. And there's a lot of pixels that aren't really changing on your screen. So like for the most part, most knowledge workers interact with their computer, and most of the data that appears, most of the pixels that appear don't change frame to frame. So step one, compress that, effectively compressing it so that you could have indefinite storage. It's about 14 gigabytes a month. Most hard drives you buy today, that's multiple years of data that you could store. We're also working on cloud and encrypted cloud backup. So eventually you can put it to the cloud if you want. But that's step one, is compression. Step two is OCR. So then we take what's on your screen and we do optical character recognition. Every word that appears, that's pixels, we turn that into the actual English word. We store that in a local database that's encrypted, that then we can query later for those words. And then we do a sort of analogous process to the things you hear and say. So we take the audio that comes out of your system audio, the audio that goes into your system microphone, we transcribe it. We use a model that runs locally on your machine called Whisper to do that. That turns into words that, again, you can search later, stores it all in the local database, and you can go back to and play back that audio. That's the sort of foundation. And then on top of that, we have an optional capability, which is asking Rewind questions. That uses GPT-4. That's the only thing that sort of everything I've said so far that connects out to the internet. It goes out there. It sends only the snippets of your past that are related to the query. None of that data is used for training. It's only retained for 30 days by OpenAI for spam and quality purposes. And that data then gets taken from OpenAI, from ChatGPT-4, and turned into a response.
It sends the context to GPT when I'm asking the question.
Correct.
So help me write an email to Sam Altman. I, as the user, don't see it, but under the hood, it's taking this package of information that Rewind has built, and it's sending it to ChatGPT to help form an answer.
Yes, a very, very, very small portion of all your data, not your whole data, just the portion needed to actually answer that question.
Got it. Okay, so I understand how that can work on macOS. iOS, I'm guessing, is very different.
Yeah, so iOS is much more limited, mostly because of the operating system limitations. So when it comes to your screen, there's two things that we capture. We do everything I said before, but just for Safari. So when you install Rewind for your phone, we have a Safari extension that takes what you see in Safari, stores it all locally, and you can rewind time back and forth on all your Safari browsing, so any web browsing. And for native apps, unfortunately, the operating system doesn't allow that capability. Well, it does, but it's a little bit kludgy. I can explain if you're interested. But instead, what we leverage is screenshots. People already take screenshots to remember things. I'm sure many people listening, take a screenshot of their confirmation number, or there's times that you take a screenshot that you think I should probably save this for later. Not automatically, if you choose to, you can import all of that into Rewind, combined with all of your Safari browsing data, and then you can search and ask any question of any of that. And by the way, that was really exciting because when we did that for iOS, unlike Mac, on iOS, people had already been capturing screenshots for many decades. And for Mac, you start at the beginning of Rewind, it's kind of this cold start problem. You start, nothing we have in there. So on the very first day we launched on iPhone, we saw all of these examples of people asking their iPhone Rewind app things that we never imagined. Like one person asked Rewind, when did I have COVID? And basically, when did I have COVID? And because they took screenshots of their kind of COVID test results, it could tell them when they had COVID. And like, I never thought that was a thing that Rewind could help you remember to do or help you remember to answer. But because people use screenshots to remember, that actually worked really well.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we all take these screenshots all day, every day. And let's be honest, we barely, if ever, look at them ever again. And now you've unlocked all this new value for them. That's really, really cool. Okay, so macOS, iOS, sounds like Windows is coming soon. But obviously now there's another vector as well, and that is the physical device, the pendant. Talk to us about the pendant, or at least your vision for the pendant. I know it hasn't shipped yet.
So the vision for the pendant is to go beyond just the experiences we have on our digital devices, beyond Mac, beyond your phone, beyond Windows, and really help you capture and remember the things that happen in the real world. And there's a bunch of use cases for that. Most people sort of go through life expecting that those things will be forgotten, or that, if they need to remember it, they'll take a note, which is kind of funny if you think about it. Like the pendant to some extent competes with note taking, but note taking, if you really boil it down, is this idea of taking a tree, chopping it down, turning it into a rectangle called paper, taking a stick with ink at the end of it and scribbling things down. And that's the way most people think is the best way to like remember stuff. And there's, of course, digital versions of that, but it's basically the same idea. It's like you have to actively think, okay, this is a thing I want to remember. I have to capture it actively. I have to be able to actually understand somebody said, write it down, and maybe, just maybe, I might go back to it later if I did a good job of having foresight to know that this is the thing I might want later. So the pendant and even Rewind on the Mac changes that model. It's entirely passive. You don't need to have foresight. It works in the background. You don't have to actually actively tell it what you might want to remember. And the joy of that is you can be much more present. You don't actually have to force yourself to try to remember things you want. It can be as simple for the pendant, for example. It can be as simple and trivial as you're at the shopping, you're at Target or at Whole Foods, or you think to yourself, what did my wife say I should pick up? And she might have told you that 15 minutes ago, and you just forgot. You could text her, sure, but wouldn't it be great to just go back like, what did she just say? Okay, got it. Or it could be, you're at a conference and you're trying to, you're in back-to-back sessions and you want to send summaries back to your team. It'd be great to just be able to passively listen and then have technology be what like a perfect chief of staff would do for you. Sit there and take notes, summarize it, and provide it for you.
So how does that work? Obviously it's recording to this device. Is it then, we talked earlier about syncing and how you're not syncing between platforms and devices. I'm guessing this has to sync in some way, right? Is it sending something to your phone?
I'm a big believer that all products should do a few things well, and not 1,000 things poorly, especially hardware products, I think should do only a few things well. And so in some ways you could think of the pendant as really just a Bluetooth microphone. It's capturing what it's hearing. It's doing it in a way that has great battery life, and most of the heavy lifting happens on your phone. I have a belief that we all carry a supercomputer in our pocket everywhere we go. I don't think we need 2 supercomputers everywhere we go. So there's a lot more flexibility. So for a lot of reasons, having a purpose-built great product, it'll be cheaper, it'll be more reliable. It does one thing really well, which is gives you perfect memory of everything you've said and heard. Everything else, you can use something else for.
So when you announced this, obviously, it caused a lot of discussion. It caused a lot of pre-orders too, I think, right? Yeah. I think you've already sold a bunch of these, which is super cool. But I know there was definitely a debate. There's some people claiming this is the most groundbreaking thing ever. Some people were concerned about the privacy. Talk a little bit about that discussion and sort of what's happened since.
Yeah, so we are now at 6,000 pre-orders, still every day, like 100 pre-orders, which is kind of crazy.
How much does it cost?
$59. So that's $354,000 in pre-orders, which is great. I mean, one of the reasons we did this in full transparency is to know, is there even demand? Like if we built this, will they come? And so it is in that sense, you could describe this in my optimizing days, the way this is described is as a painted door test. Like put it out there, see if people want it. If they do, then put a lot of resources behind it. If they don't, then just accept that, okay, maybe this isn't something that's a top priority. So that's, now is sort of number one thing we learned. The reaction from a privacy perspective was exactly what we're hoping for. We really wanted the category of these devices to have a privacy first mandate from the public. I think that's going to be critical to making this a mainstream, socially acceptable device. And you just have to go back and look at Google Glass to see the opposite of that. Google Glass is a classic example of technology in search of a problem, a fancy device that they didn't really have a clear understanding what the problem is, and they put it out there and hoped people would figure it out for them. But instead of being, and because they were so cavalier on privacy, it ended up having a backlash. And the story isn't yet about privacy. We really got to get ahead of this and make sure the narrative is focused on how do we make this a socially acceptable, privacy first device? not a cool fashion gizmo that Paris Fashion Week, but something that ordinary people can look at and feel comfortable that that person isn't invading their privacy. So that was the goal in this announcement, and we achieved that goal. Well, I certainly got a lot of hard questions. I'm really glad I did, because those are the questions that I think are going to be important to answer for this category of devices, not just our product, but the entire category of AI wearable devices to really be a success.
Through these questions, what have you learned that people are demanding from a privacy perspective, and how has that impacted how you plan to build the product?
Very, very similar to the announcement of the telephone. People think today, like telephone, the most obvious or the most common, one very common complaint of the telephone when it first emerged was privacy. And a big reason why was the very first version of the telephone required you to go to the general store to make a phone call. It wasn't in your house. So people worried about, who's going to eavesdrop on my call at the general store? Even when it came to your home, you had this issue of the eavesdropping switchboard operator. And it wasn't until the technology could catch up to solving those two problems, it was cheap enough to have in your home without a switchboard operator, that it went mainstream. And I see the exact same things happening with the Pendant, which is everyone is criticizing the equivalent of the Pendant or the AI wearable as the telephone in the general store. Yeah, there are issues around privacy that we need to solve and fix, but those are solvable and fixable through technology. I'm happy to share several examples of that. And that was the biggest thing I learned. Is like, wow, history is repeating itself. This isn't new. Every new technology goes through this kind of awe, skepticism, scorn, hate. And ultimately, those are all steps along the way to mass market adoption and normalization.
The thing I thought about was the Alexa and the Google Home, and the fact that, only a few years ago, we put these devices in our homes and that are effectively listening, right? And I think the way we all got comfortable was we trusted the fact that until we said a certain, wake word or trigger phrase, it wasn't actually listening, right? The listening was just stored very locally and very, very briefly. But in the case of that, and also the telephone, you think about the fact that these things for sort of like all of the participants are kind of like opt in, right? Is there an element of that with the Rewind for people? Will there be like a red light or something where, hey, if I'm sitting with you, Dan, like I know I'm being recorded without having to ask?
First of all, visual indicators are very important. So we will have that. It will not work under your shirt. It will only work out of your shirt. That's why the form factor is designed as it is. And part of it is just how the microphones are designed.
It'll be muffled.
Yeah, so it is by design. We don't want it to be used in a covert. You can go on Amazon, buy some spy glasses or whatever. We don't want this to even be used in that way, because I think that will damage this category writ large. There's so many uses and utilities for this product when it's out in the public. Like, it would be silly to sort of, just because it's possible, make it used and make it possible to use it as a covert device. So that is number one, the goal. It's like, definitely we don't want people to use this in a covert way. One idea that we're really excited about from a opt-in perspective is voice fingerprinting and speaker diarization. And what that simply means is, by the audio that gets captured by the microphone, the smartphone that's attached to the device can determine who is speaking and has that person previously actually verbally opted in to being recorded. So that would mean effectively is, if you and I were talking and I had the Pendant on, I, as an owner of the Pendant, would have opted in beforehand. At some point during our conversation, maybe I'll say, "Hey, Michael, are you okay if if we capture this, record it with the Pendant?" And if you said, "Sure, yeah, I'm fine with being recorded," then the Pendant hears your voice, recognizes the voice, fingerprints your voice, and then when you in the future speak, you then get captured. And if you don't say yes, it's as if you never were in the conversation. It's just a one-sided conversation. I'm talking, I can capture myself. There's no laws against that. There's no privacy concerns around that. But when you speak, you only get captured if you opt in. So that's one of the ideas we're playing with. That's a hard problem to solve, but I think that's the equivalent of the eavesdropping switchboard operators for the telephone. It's like, let's make it so that people feel comfortable. Those are the things that I think will make a big difference in people's perception of this product.
Going back to something we talked about earlier, sort of startups versus incumbents, who has the advantage, empathy versus opportunity. It feels like there are incumbents that can also do this really, really well, right? If they wanted to. We talked about Alexa's in my home. We talked about, we didn't talk about it, but I'm wearing an Apple Watch. Maybe you are as well. Do you think that the incumbents will try to attempt something as well? And how will their distribution factor into this problem space?
I absolutely think if the incumbents chose to do this, they could crush it. I don't think they will, and there's a basic reason why: the innovator's dilemma.
Okay.
The last thing, and even I can guarantee you, there are people at Apple today who've seen Rewind on Mac and think this is amazing. This is going to give us $10 billion in subscription service revenue. Services is the future. Let's build this app. And for every one of them, there's 100 people at Apple who are either lawyers or privacy zealots or paranoid, conservative, brand-oriented people who say, don't do that. No, this is scary. This is taboo. This is new. They would much rather guys like me blaze the path and sort of take all the punches for them and then, slowly, come in behind after we've proven the market. Then they're going to be the ones that innovate. And maybe I'm proven wrong. I'm not trying to be cavalier here, but I would be shocked and in fact, very impressed if Apple had the courage to take the risk of creating a new category in this space, especially given what Tim Cook has said publicly around privacy, what he said to Congress around privacy. I think the last thing Apple's going to do is take a risk around a new product category that we're defining, and they have yet to see that. And just look at Dropbox as a good example. They wanted to do Dropbox, what Dropbox did for a long time. They tried to buy Dropbox, they couldn't, and eventually they launched iCloud many, many years later. And the big difference is, I'm sure iCloud is doing great compared to Dropbox, but the main difference is we aren't just files. What we're storing is capturing everything you see staying here, an encrypted proprietary database on your device. You can't just copy and paste your memories from Rewind into the Apple free equivalent. So I believe we're building a huge advantage. I hope Tim's not listening to this, but I believe that we're building a huge lead many years, hopefully, before Apple does this. And I think, frankly, it's inevitable that they will, because it's a good idea. It's just a question of when will the innovator's dilemma, get so small compared to the opportunity they see in this category.
Maybe zooming out a little bit, staying on this privacy topic a little bit, zooming out, not super specific to Rewind. It feels like, given everything that's happening with AI, data is kind of like the new gold, right? Every company that is building these personalized experiences just wants to kind of like suck up as much of this data as possible to provide a superior experience. And frankly, it feels like it's also a little bit of the Wild West out there, right? How do you see this all playing out? This sort of data gold rush for AI. What does this look like a few years from now?
I think data is super critical to making LLMs work well. We certainly would never sell our customer data. We don't have access to it. It's all stored locally. So in that sense, we have a deep commitment to the business model we have, which is a subscription. It's free product, generally very featureful free product. And if you want to pay for some of the bells and whistles, you pay us. And that's how we make money. And that's how we're sustainable. And that's how we will grow. We're not like an ads driven business. We're not a data swapping business. But I do think data is critical. I mean, data and context in particular, that subset of data that is useful for a large language model to produce an answer, I do think is pretty compelling. I have some, secret ideas around what actually will work and won't. I won't share those because I think they're easy to copy once you see that they work. I saw a long time ago a talk by Diane Green and I think Bill Gates around China and the data gold rush and the United States and the data gold rush. I don't think it's as simple as who has more data wins, the way who has more gold wins. It's not a more is better. It's a better is better.
Better is better.
If you have the right data, if you know how to take the pixels on your screen and turn it into words, turn that data into knowledge and take that knowledge, or into information, then information into knowledge, and that knowledge into wisdom, that's the part that gets valuable, not just the sheer number of terabytes of data you have.
Okay. Now zooming back to Rewind. What's the plan for the Pendant? When is it coming out? Maybe also, what's it like building a hardware product after only ever building software?
Yeah, it's so early to say on all those questions. I would say people have sat me down and tried to convince me numerous times.
Don't do hardware.
Don't do hardware. Hardware is hard. And I think they're right. I'm not being cavalier about it. But I go back to the point I made earlier. I do think hardware is hard when you don't know the problem you're solving. It's not magic. It's hard. Physical atoms are much harder to move than digital bits. But if that's what it takes to build a truly personalized AI, I think it's worth the schlep. So that's my view on it. But I'll just be very transparent. We're so early that I can't even give you a date. My guess is it will be much later than all of our competitors, in part because we would much rather build a better product. We hope by announcing it now, we force those competitors to really think about privacy. But even if they don't, we're going to come back. We're going to come back after them with a much more privacy-focused product that will ultimately win the market.
It sounds like you're building this company in ways that you didn't build Optimizely, maybe from some of the lessons you learned about your path there. What are some of the other ways that you're building this company in a different, new, fresh way for you?
Boy, if I had to go back, I could do so many things better. If I think about it, if I took myself and put myself in Dan from Optimizely 10 years ago, so many things I did wrong back then that I'm doing right now. First is a small, nimble team is much better than a large junior team. And I think is I couldn't have hired the people I've hired at Rewind. I couldn't have hired them back at Optimizely. I wasn't good enough. The company wasn't good enough. That is, I think, a huge advantage is the people. The second is culture. I was actually very explicit at Optimizely about our culture. We had cultural values that we codified, and I think we did a good job of walking the walk. But I think I took that to a whole other level with Rewind. We publish our culture memo. It's out there. You can see all our values, why we think culture is important. Every important decision we make, we root it in the cultural values. Every quarter, we do 360s, very lightweight 360s on each other. And that's where we give each other feedback on how we're living up to our cultural values. So all of those things, I think, have made it so much better this time around compared to last time.
Well, it really sounds like you're having an awesome experience. We covered so much ground. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have, or any stories you feel like need to be told?
I think I'll add, I am actually having a lot of fun. And it kind of, as you mentioned that, it reminded me of something I saw yesterday from Jensen Huang, who's the co-founder and CEO of NVIDIA. And he was asked, if you were starting a startup today, what would you do? And he said, I wouldn't do it. He said that running NVIDIA and creating NVIDIA was like 1,000, or I think maybe he said 1,000,000 times harder than he thought. And look, I haven't had the privilege of building an NVIDIA. Once I have, so I don't think I can even question it. Like, once I've built $1 trillion market cap company, maybe then I can have a talk with him about it.
You can quit then.
Yeah. But I guess my experience has been different. Like, it's been hard, but the hard part is the part I love. And I think maybe my brain is just wired in the wrong way or the right way, where like the pain that he and maybe Elon Musk writes about is the pleasure that I feel. Like the uncertainty, the effort, the work, the sacrifice are all the things that I love about the job. So I guess if you have my one last thing is if you're some of your listeners are thinking out there, boy, maybe I should be an entrepreneur, maybe I shouldn't. I don't want you to think that the only path to success or the only path as an entrepreneur, success or failure, is pain. It's certainly there are hard days, but I can tell you unequivocally, there's nothing I'd rather be doing than I'm doing right now. And I think it's the best job in the world is to be an entrepreneur.
I know you said it earlier, but please remind us again, are you hiring? Where can people find out about opportunities to work at Rewind?
Yeah, we are hiring across the board. Go to rewind.ai/careers. We've got a lot of amazing roles. You join us, you'll have a huge amount of autonomy and ownership and trust. And you can help us build a superpower.
And then last but not least, tell us where we can try the product.
Rewind.ai is the best place to go. You can download the product today for Mac. We have a very generous free product on Mac. You can go to the App Store, download Rewind there as well. And soon you'll be able to download it on Windows.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much. This was so much fun. Really, really appreciate you giving us all this time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Generative Now. If you liked what you heard, please do us a favor and rate and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That actually really helps. And if you want to follow me, you can find me at Mignano on X and LinkedIn and anywhere else. And if you want to follow Lightspeed, you can find us at Lightspeed VP on all the same platforms. Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. Big thanks to our production team. This show wouldn't be possible without them. And I'm Michael Mignano. Thanks again. We'll be back next week with another fascinating conversation.